Welcome to Order Militaris Radio TV, and we are lifelong Catholics. And what we do is all for free and for our love of Jesus Christ and for the Holy Mother, the Church, and will defend our Holy Mother, the Church. Today's program, we are going to tell you how certain documents in Vatican II came to be and how Father Fenton did his best to learn what was going on and how to fight it. We were with Brother Alexis Bonello.
Thank you, AJ, for having me on Ordo Militaris Radio TV. It's always a pleasure and honor, and a particular one in this long series that we're doing on the doctrinal warfare program of the United States government against the Catholic Church, and reading from the wonderful book that I recommend everyone get a copy of. AJ, you can show everyone. It's entitled John Courtney Murray, Time, Life, and the American Proposition. And it has an even more interesting subtitle.
How the CIA's doctrinal warfare program changed the Catholic Church by David A. Wimoff, lawyer in South Bend, Indiana, a law professor at Notre Dame University.
And this is a massively documented 900 plus page book. It will let you know what's really been going on in the Catholic Church in the United States and in the Vatican in the last 100 years. You got to drop everything and read this book, because you haven't heard this from the clergy, because the CIA has been winning the war and they've controlled the information outlets. So we discussed how the U.S. government began its doctrinal warfare program in 1953. They prepared for the council. They may have even got John the 23rd to call the council. And they had Time, Life magazine there to cover the council. They were really CIA agents. It was a front. And they were intimately involved in manipulating it. And there was like one hero at the council that we can say from the United States, and that was Father Clifford Fenton, Monsignor Fenton. And he smelled a rat from the first weeks of the council. And we discussed that in our last program. So now we take up the narrative again in May of 1963.
Yeah.
And tell us more, AJ.
Fenton tried to make sense of what was going on at the council before returning to Rome in May 1963. While resting in Rochester, New York, in a guest room of the bishop's house, he collected his thoughts for an upcoming lecture by delineating the council's goals. While the purpose of the council was spiritual, it involved teaching and also legislation. And the object of this legislation is to direct the people of God so that their faith may be protected and may become more intense, so that they may love God and each other more effectively. Fenton recognized the issue of most interest to Catholics was the conservative liberal question. Liberal Catholicism, he wrote, represented the teaching of the Catholic Church as comparable with the maxims that guided the French Revolution. In practice, the men who advanced the doctrines of separation of church and state, etc., as these have been condemned by the popes since Leo XII, are called liberal Catholics. The term was not considered respectable until a few years ago. Practically, the men who are designated as liberals by the press are those who seek a pastoral rather than a scholastic approach to the teaching and legislation of the council.
And to clarify here, because a lot of people don't understand the terms liberals and separation in church and state, what is the Catholic point of view? Catholic point of view is that Catholics, Christians, at all times, in private and in public life, should act as Christians and proclaim the reign of Jesus Christ. And therefore, politics cannot be separated from Christian faith, and a Christian cannot be separated from political life. And where Christians are present in any political body, they should militate politically and socially and culturally and spiritually for the advancement of the reign of Jesus Christ on earth. And that includes Christianizing the state. And where they're a majority, they have the right the divine right to govern and to be ruled by Christian laws. And therefore, separating church and state in a Christian society is completely contradictory to the will of God and the will of Jesus Christ, and completely incompatible with Christian faith. And sustaining that separation can only be done by betraying Christian faith and not living it the way the Holy Spirit wishes us to. So that's the Catholic position on separation church and state. And liberal, there's no such thing as a liberal Catholic, because you have to pass on what you have received. The faith is the same from Christ down to the present. It cannot be altered, and therefore you can't be in favor of adapting it to the world. That's what the liberals want. They want freedom from God's law so they can sin. And conservative, there's no such thing as conservative, because conservatives don't want what liberals want today. They want what liberals wanted 20 years ago, and that's just a fake opposition. And those are both concepts promoted by the Masonic Lodge to deceive people who don't think about what they mean and the game that's being played. So this is a serious matter, that liberals were being given the upper hand in the council. That showed quite clearly that either John the 23rd was acting like a Mason, or he was fooled or misled.
And he goes on to say that one of the dangerous things he noticed was the pushing of Americanism, which was condemned by Leo XIII, and it was now running rampant in the council.
Yeah, and this is the hallmark of the CIA, because their effort was to promote Americanism, to promote the idea that America is the fulfillment of Christianity, and that the Catholic Church needs to like dissolve, go away, and become Americanist. And this was their objective at the council, and they did it in 2 different documents. And Father Fenton was aware of the attack on the church. He didn't know that it was the CIA who was behind it, the US government. So what was his first concerns that he writes about in the spring of 1963?
So I'm going to just go to his diary. So
yeah, you can find online Father Fenton's diaries, and AJ will put a link in the show, and you got to read his diaries if you really know what was the council's about.
yeah.
And you'll be very surprised to tell you that the tradies and the traditional movement have not been telling you the whole story.
Yeah.
Father Fenton will tell you the whole story.
Let's read from the book first. While in Rome, waiting for the council to begin, Fenton read 2 books on modernism, given him by a good friend, a former student, who served as the eulogist at Fenton's funeral years later, Father Edward Hanno. In one of them, I'm quoting from his diary, in one of them, I found evidence that the teaching in the first chapter of the new schema on the church, the one that became Vatican II's dogmatic constitution, Lumen Gentium, in the language are those of the excommunicated modernist Father George Tyrrell. May God preserve his church. From that chapter, if it passes, it will be great evil. I must pray and act.
He's a man really loves his church. Those words are tremendous. And according to Father Fenton, did those words get passed?
Yeah, because we have Lumen Gentium today.
Mm-hmm.
And act he did, he explained the reality to Bishop Verni, Archbishop of Staffa, and Cardinal Ottaviani, all of whom expressed surprise. Meanwhile, a number of Patri had written a Latin letter to the individual bishops, warning them about the new theology. Later, Ruffini used the same information provided by Fenton to great effect. Fenton's efforts were having an impact in resisting modernism and Americanism while keeping the council focused on the truth. Fenton explained Paul VI's own concern with doctrinal liberties by some at the council, at the Holy Office of Saint Assa, Ottaviani, and Parenti, All was going well. All of them were disgusted with Murphy and Kaiser. Ottaviani was very grateful for my research on Tyrell. He had just seen the Pope, and he reported that the Pope was concerned with the doctrinal issue.
So here is one of the greats of the council that you almost never hear talked about. And I've heard his name mentioned over the years, Father Fenton. And I think someone has mentioned he was at the council, but no one is really focused in what he did there. That's why it's so important to read his diary and from the first hand. Don't read books like the Tiber flows into the Rhine flows into the Tiber, written by an anonymous. Read Father Fenton's diary to get the real Catholic point of view.
Then the second session council finally begins September 29th. In Kung's book, The Council in Action was published by Sheed and Ward, and of course, praised by Time Inc. The Americans again had an opportunity to depict as good the reformers who pointed out the problems with the church, and to cascade those who opposed such intellectuals and progressive modernizers. All of these reformers had one time or another been censured for the views that they expressed as these views were considered by higher authority to be against the teaching of the church. Each of these intellectuals and reformers was someone who advocated a position or a view that was favored by the Americans because it would result in a weakening of the church, her authority, and the effectiveness of her doctrine.
Mm-hmm. So when we talk about doctrinal warfare, warfare is well chosen because this is an effort to ideologically destroy the church, break its morale, break its central government, break the adhesion of its members. And we see how effective it's been. The church right now is almost as if it doesn't exist. It's an arm of the globalist worldwide government. And not the church, but the clergy. They're not acting as our pastors in Christ. They're not acting as people in communion with Christ. And the laity completely scattered if they're not death-vaxxed already. And but the gates of hell won't prevail over the church, but it's good to know what the attack was so that we can be part of the counterattack that's coming. So then the next attack was brought by Murray. He comes out of nowhere, a father evil CIA agent Murray. He was just so shunned before the council, but what's he do? How did they sneak him into the council?
So let's see. Yeah, so 1 month before the second session in August, U.S. Catholic bishops gathered at an informed meeting at which they issued a public statement which claimed they intended to support fully the document on religious liberty. And after the meeting, the bishop sent Cardinal Spellman quietly to Pope Paul to begin the process of finalizing the document. None of this would have happened without the efforts of John Courtney Murray, who became the pertinence to the council. At the council, thanks to Spellman's efforts. And Murray also wrote the document.
So he wrote Dignitatis Humanae, and it goes on to become one of the council documents. This is why it cannot be overemphasized that no Catholic with a good conscience can adhere to the documents of the Second Vatican Council. Because first, the council did not promulgate them as infallible, and second, they either contain the doctrine of condemned heretics or they were written by CIA agents. So you would violate the very principle of divine faith by obeying people who are enemies of the church. You can only obey God and his true servants who represent him. And you can't obey fakers, frauds, and enemies. And that's the bait and switch. And this is why the globalist bought and paid for clergy always will insist on the documents of Vatican II. Because if you reject them, then you become Catholic again. You become free of the doctrinal warfare program, and they can't catch you. You're like a slippery fish because you're following the current of the Holy Spirit. And this is what every Catholic needs to do. There can't be any negotiation on this point. You can't accept part of it. It's just got to throw the whole thing away. And you can do so merely on the basis of historical facts. And that's what's so important about the writings of Father Fenton and this book that we're covering. Once you know the facts, and your conscience kicks in, if you have one, and you must reject the whole thing. It's not Catholic. It never was Catholic. There's nothing Catholic about it other than Council Fathers decided it's a good document. It doesn't have doctrinal authority, but we'll say it's okay. But that doesn't make it Catholic. It has to already be Catholic.
So some of the notes were from Murray, where he wanted to attack Ottaviani's thesis and hypothesis. And here's the quotes from Murray. Ottaviani's two-standard theory, what I call disjunctive theory, will remain on the books, untouched as essential and pure Catholic doctrine. He holds that it is proxima fide, and Ruffini agrees. And the Council's practical statements will look like sheer concession to today's circumstance, a matter of expediency, or in a word, the thing called hypothesis, again affirmed, to the joy of the curial right, who will have triumphed, and what will have been, in effect, no more than affirmation by the Council of their own doctrine. And is this what the American bishops want? And Murray answers his own question. I am inclined to think, I hope not unjustly, that many American bishops really believe in their own minds that the American constitutional situation is no more than a hypothesis in the Ottaviani sense, a situation to be consented to only on grounds of expediency, because in the practical order it works well, even though it cannot really be defended in principle.
Yeah, so the hypothesis is kind of a strange way of talking. What he's meaning to say is he did not, Murray, the CIA bought and paid for guy, he didn't want the Council to merely say, we can tolerate religious liberty because it's just expedient for the moment, because that wouldn't be a doctrinal surrender. He wanted the church to come out and actually say, no, we accept religious liberty. That's the true meaning of Christianity. And that would be a deviancy from the deposit of faith. And that would introduce a principle into all the formation of the clergy to turn them into agents of globalism and no longer preachers of the gospel, which is what we see has happened. And because if you buck that doctrine on dignitatis humanae, they will not ordain you as a priest. They won't elevate you to the bishopric, and you won't be named a cardinal. And that is the whole system of control. It's ideologic.
Yeah. It's just Murray's change in the church's teaching was based on 4 principles. These were: first, that the concept of the state was evolving; second, society and the state were distinguished from each other, which was, according to Murray, a good thing, because Leo XIII confused the two because of his polemic preoccupations. Third, there were at least 2 kinds of separation of church and state, presented by continental liberalism, and other being American constitutionalism. Fourth, the pragmatic test. The experience of the American church should be corrected to reflect that the American Constitution is not good because it works because it is good.
Yeah, so he was a very slippery individual. He's trying to counter-argue the Catholic position that error has no lie and that false religion has no right. And this goes back to the whole idea. I mentioned this in previous programs. As soon as you start talking about religious liberty, you're using a term that can mean totally two different things. It could mean the right of every human being to know the true God, accept his revelation, and obey his will in public and private. That's the only Catholic definition of religious liberty. But in the liberal or the Masonic or the worldly or the secular or the non-Christian sense, religious liberty is the ability for you to practice whatever you want to believe without persecution by the state. Those are totally two different liberties. The modern Masonic state pretends to be blind as to which religion is true, so that it can tolerate them all, even though the Masonic Lodge really worships Satan, and therefore any religion but the true one is fine. And you will find actually in the history since the French Revolution to the present, only one religion is really persecuted, and that's the Catholic faith, because that's the true one. And that's why the Masons want religious liberty. They want all the enemies of Christ's church to have liberty. They don't want the Catholic Church to have liberty. So you can't talk about religious liberty unless you define the term. And this is what they keep from doing. And this is what's not done in the Vatican document.
Want more craziness from Murray?
What did Fenton comment on Murray's document?
See there. Who's this Testament guy? Let's see here. Let's see here. Okay. From the diary. The part on ecumenism in the text on the commission is a joke. It reads like a 19th century text or a second-rate article in a leftist magazine. The day before yesterday, I had dinner with Ottaviani. On the way back, I found that the Pope had written to Ottaviani on schema number 13. I saw a letter. It was a great mistake to let that one, the one on religious liberty, which became Dignitatis Humani, and the one on non-Christian religions became Nostra Aetate, kept by the council.
Mm-hmm. So he was there to see the defeat go through. And unfortunately, the Council Fathers a lot of money was flowing, a lot of bribes were being taken, a lot of private parties being held, government agents were working overtime, and Father Fenton was one of the lone voices there without ending happen. And if you could say from a point of view of administration why the council failed is that before calling an ecumenical council, the Holy Office needs to be beefed up, have a big security apparatus, a lot of agents on the scene, because we're in the modern world. There's a lot, the modern enemies are much more fierce than the ancient ones. And if you don't know what the enemy's doing, if you don't have intelligence and counterintelligence services that aren't infiltrated, then you won't know how to defend yourself ideologically, unless you have a very enlightened Pope who can see it, for what it is. So these shenanigans by time cause them to earn a censure, don't they?
Yeah. So the Holy Office holding on until the Council Fathers got rid of it to make what we know as the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. So at the last remnants of the Holy Office, time got censured, but they turned it into a badge of honor.
And what was
and time is
there? What did they how time spin it?
The great Jesuit paleontologist Pierre Teilhard de Chardin was forbidden to publish his non-technical works during his lifetime. In recent years, three of France's finest theologians, Jesuit Henri de Lubac, Dominican Yves Conga, M.D. Chenu, have been temporarily relieved from teaching posts. and forced to submit their writings to the Holy Office for special censorship. Last year, Austrian Jesuit Karl Rahner was required to submit all future writings to the Superior in Rome for clearance, a restriction since lifted. Father John Courtney Murray of the U.S. was advised not to write anymore in a special field of study, church and state relations. In the Catholic Church of the 20th century, a U.S. priest dryly explains, the grace of martyrdom has been given to the intellectual. And it was, they were like, yes, we have joined that.
What blasphemy. Absolutely blasphemy. They exalt their own agents to the level of martyrdom, say that redefining Christianity. Christ is no longer the master. The Masonic Lodge is the master. The Catholic Church is no longer the true religion. America is the true religion. And the agents of the American state are saints. Now, this little quote you just quoted sheds light on why John the 23rd, Paul the 6th, John Paul II were canonized and beatified. This explains it, because you have to canonize and beatify the agents of the deep state, the people who went along with the defeat of the Catholic Church by the Masonic lodges, to fool Catholics into thinking that being defeated is being holy. That's what it's all about. A thing unheard of in the history of the church. I mean, before the Second Vatican Council, only one pope, two popes since the Council of Trent were canonized, Pius V and Pius X, and because they were fighters against the enemies of the faith. So how is it that every pope since the Council is being canonized? Except Benedict XVI, of course, he's the enemy. He was a Nazi. He was the only anti-Nazi among them.
And it was,
as we mentioned before, John Paul II. Oh, excuse me. As we mentioned before, John Paul II, when he was during the Second World War, worked in an armament factory producing bombs for the Nazis.
mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
It was Pope Benedict XVI who went back into history to Pope Pius VII and declared him, I think, servant of God or venerable. And I believe he sent me this.
Yeah.
The Holy Fire. Pius VII.
Innocent the 11th is also blessed.
Yeah.
So there are some blesseds, but saints they're rare. So, so this finishes off what, the second session, and
second session.
I can't emphasize how much. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, the second session was all on the real religious liberty of document of Mary, and that became Dignitatis Humanae, and then the other one became Lumen Gentium.
Lumen Gentium is passed by the Council Fathers on. It's voted and on the 17th of September 1964. So that comes in the next year.
Yeah.
And the council will conclude in December of 1964. So it lasted 2 years. So non-infallible, non-disciplinary council.
Yeah. That
never claimed any authority to change anything. And that's an important note that anyone should make. How can you be obliged to accept that which is itself not obligatory? This is the same game in the scamdemic. Why is it that I must lose my job because I don't take a vax? Because there was a mandate I take a vax from an authority that doesn't have any authority to order me to take it. See, this is the satanic thing. They want you to obey things that aren't legitimate orders from legitimate superiors. And they want you to disobey legitimate orders from legitimate superiors, especially from God. And that's always the hallmark of the diabolic.
Yeah. And you might think in this chapter on the second session, oh, that seems pretty weak on the psychological warfare. Yeah, But in our next program is the next session, and the CIA ratchets it up to even higher level in the first session.
Okay, so will that conclude our next program? Will conclude our coverage on the Second Vatican Council,
Yeah,
the actual sessions. Yeah. So this is an important battle of the ages, and they think they have won, but that's not the case. And Pope Benedict actually planned for that undoing, and we'll see how that takes place in the next few years. But to help you understand what really went on, and just to stop all this hee-hawing about interpreting the council. There's no use. It's a waste of time trying to interpret the council. It's enemy written documents, okay, designed solely to destroy the church. Just toss it right out and go back to Vatican I and the Council of Trent. The writings and the Doctors of Fathers of Saints, and great theologians like Father Fenton. And I highly recommend you download his diaries from the link that's going to be on the show page. And if you seriously want to learn about what a Catholic thought about the council as it was happening, with a kind of like a frankness that these canceled priests that are coming out in media today and this year talk about. Father Fenton was very frank that way.
Yep. So stay tuned for our next episode. It might be a bit longer because the chapters are going to get longer, and you're going to see how evil the CIA was in that next session.
Okay, thank you, AJ, for having me on Order Militaris Radio TV for this second episode on the Vatican Council as part of our series on the doctrinal warfare program of the U.S. government against the Catholic Church.
This is Order Militaris Radio TV signing off. Deus Volt.
Deus Volt.